Hi friends, I'm Brea, and recently I filmed a video where I talked about the upcoming book to screen adaptations, and Mickey 7 / Mickey 17 was on that list. So today I will be reading Mickey 7 for the first time, soaking it in, getting the full story, and then going to watch Mickey 17 so I can kind of compare the two. Is the book or the movie better? The great debate. We'll see. And I'm just interested because Bong Joon-ho is the director of this film and Robert Pattinson is such an interesting actor. I'm curious to see what their take is on it, what the pacing's like, what the take on the characters are. So without further ado, let's just get into reading. So I'm not gonna lie, this book is so good, I almost forgot about y'all for real. Like, I'm 70% of the way through and I had to be like, oop, I'm supposed to be talking to them about this book. And if it wasn't for that, this book would have been read. It would have been done. So we follow Mickey, who signs up to be an expendable for a space mission where a community of people is trying to find a new place to settle down. And so right now they're kind of just like up in space, living. They found somewhere they want to be, but they're testing like a few things out before they really settle down. And an expendable is someone who they can use to do dangerous activities, or they need to run some science experiments on that would likely prove fatal. And so the way that an expendable works is that once they die, they're cloned and they come back, and typically the expendable prior uploads their conscious and everything they learned in that body, so that the next version of that person has all of that information, and then that clone is renumbered. So we meet Mickey 7 and we meet him when he is essentially left for dead and he is supposed to die. However, he doesn't. And so he makes his way back to the compound and realizes they've already cloned him and that Mickey 8 exists. So there's two iterations of Mickey in this world. And this is an issue obviously for many reasons, but both Mickey 7 and Mickey 8 are trying to figure out a way to stay alive and not get caught, because they know if they get caught, either one or both of them is going into what they call the recycler, which just means they're out of here. And I absolutely love the way this story is being told. We are getting the thought process of Mickey 7. We are getting kind of the history of this space mission. We are learning also about the past and why Mickey ended up being an expendable. We also learned some context around his relationships in the story, which end up being a very big part of the story. And you know, the tone of this book, Mickey is kind of a smartass, and I absolutely love it. There's like this undertone of comedy in the book, while also this man is essentially like fighting for his life, which is, I put in quotation marks because he's the 7th iteration. But the story is so entertaining and it's going by super quick. And I stopped at 70% of the way through because I just got to, I feel like, a climax of the story. And so I'm interested to see where we're gonna end up. Mickey 7, Mickey 8. I'm intrigued. And now that I'm 70% of the way into the book, I'm really curious to see how they adapt this into a movie, and I'm really curious to see the angle that Robert Pattinson takes as Mickey, because I've seen some trailers for the movie and I feel like what I saw or what I remember seeing doesn't necessarily match up to how I envision Mickey, but we'll see. I'm sure they'll switch things up. Robert Pattinson is a fantastic actor, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later. I'm probably going to finish this tonight, so I'll have another update for you guys pretty soon. Okay, y'all, Mickey was playing chess, not checkers, okay? That last 30% of the book really just did it for me. Obviously, the first 70% had me intrigued, had me questioning how like their society worked, had me really just kind of learning about the characters, but the last 30% really just kind of had me on the edge of my seat and really gave a lot of substance to the story. But with all of that said, I am going to give this a 4.25. There were a few things that were lacking for me or that I wish that I would have seen. So the first one is there was a sentient being or sentient creatures that were mentioned in the book, and I really wish we got to see more interaction with them, because originally it was kind of giving me Project Hail Mary vibes, like if you know, you know, but we didn't really get that much interaction with them, which I was pretty disappointed by. There was also a few characters where we learned about some of their relationships in the beginning of the book, and I assumed that we would learn a little bit more about them as the book went on, but we didn't. So there's a specific character named Kat who I didn't really understand her relationship with Mickey. There were some things that were implied, but they just never really came to fruition, and we never really got more information on them. But overall, I feel like Mickey, not only a smartass, he was smart. Okay, I feel like he was underestimated the entire time. The book did feel like it kind of ended abruptly, but I think that's because there is a sequel to this book, and I did read like the first chapter of the sequel, and I can understand where it's probably going to go, but I would be interested in reading the sequel for sure. So overall, I definitely enjoyed this book. I can understand why it's being created into a movie. I feel like there is this issue in the like movie space where it just feels like we're getting the same movies over and over again. There's like a formula that Hollywood follows, which seems to be working for them okay. But you know, when I think about like K-dramas on Netflix, and when I think about the movies that like Japanese and Korean directors and artists put out, they always just seem like original ideas, right? Like they're always just things that we're not used to seeing in America. The storylines are written really differently. The relationship dynamics are usually really different. So with Mickey 7, I do feel like this is more of an original idea that we're going to get to see in theaters, which I'm really excited about. I am curious. I'm not going to know because I'm not going to read the sequel before I go see the movie, but I am curious to see like how far the movie goes, like if it only covers what was in the first book, or if it's going to cover anything that was in the second book, or if there's a possibility that we'll see a sequel to Mickey 7, because there is a sequel to the book. So I'm interested to see just how they wrap that up. I was also seeing some commentary online about one of the characters, Nasha, and her role in the movie, and I want to form my own opinion about the actors and the roles and how the characters are portrayed, but people are having a positive reaction to that character in the movie. And while that character did have a somewhat big part to play in this book, there really wasn't that big of an impact from that character on me as I was reading the book. And just to provide some context, Nasha is Mickey 7's love interest in the book, and she's also a pilot for this mission. Yeah, overall, pleasant experience so far, but I'm going to go see the movie tomorrow. I'm already trying to decide what snacks I'm going to get, if I'm going to be healthy and just get like a Coke Zero and some popcorn, or if I'm going to go all in. We'll see, but I will see you guys at the movies. I was a little concerned when I was coming up with this idea for this video that I wasn't gonna have too much to say about the movie itself, but surprisingly enough, I do have, I feel like, a good amount to say about this movie. So get your popcorn ready. You see what I did there? But I'm gonna break my kind of movie review out into 3 parts. One part is gonna be like the pre-movie show, which I'll get into detail here in a second. The second part is going to be the storyline and the overall like book versus the movie. And then the last part is going to be the actors and the characters. But the pre-movie show, and this is something that I wasn't expecting. I did get to the theater about 30 minutes early. I don't have anything else to do, okay? But I'm glad that I did, because they actually had a lot of like trailers and interviews that actually tied to Mickey 17. So there was actually an interview with Bong Joon-ho, which is the director of Mickey 17. He was also the director of Parasite, which won a lot of awards. He's also been the director of a few other movies, and they really just talked about like what his inspiration is for some of like the pacing in his movies, other directors and other movies that he really kind of looks up to. After the interview, they actually did have some other cool snippets going on. So it actually talked about the history of cloning in movies and in Hollywood, and it gave this full list of other movies in the past that have had something to do with cloning. It even gave statistics around what the subject matter actually was and like what the purpose of the clones were in that movie. And then it even talked about accents, because Robert Pattinson has or does an accent in Mickey 17, which I will also get to in a second. But it actually did a montage of all the different voices that he's done in his past movies, and it even tells you what character or characters he studied to come up with the voice for Mickey in this movie. And knowing that information, it put a lot of perspective into that voice. I will just say before we get into the actors and actresses later down the line that Robert Pattinson's voice in this was definitely like a jump scare for my ears the first couple of minutes. But let's focus on the storyline and the book versus movie aspect of it right now. So I feel like most of the critiques when a book is turned into a movie is that the movie left out things. And honestly, I feel like I have the opposite critique here. I feel like after seeing the movie, I feel like the book left things out. Like, I think some of the stuff that I struggled with in the book, like some of the relationships that I didn't understand, seeing that dynamic on screen made a lot more sense. Also, pieces of the storyline were adjusted a little bit. Obviously, that's to be expected when something's getting adapted into a movie, but I feel like the way they did it, it just made a lot more sense for the full arc of the story, if I'm being honest. But some points that they really did carry over from the book was the comedic undertone. This was done so masterfully, because if you read the book, there is this undertone where you can't really put your finger on why it's a little funny. And I feel like in the movie, they did exactly that. And it felt like this kind of like smart, satirical humor in some ways. Another thing that I'll say was addressed in the movie that I didn't really like in the book was Mickey 18. So in the book, I just felt like he wasn't as purposeful as I was hoping he'd be. But in the movie, that was rectified, and I absolutely loved the Mickey 18 character. Even though he was a bit frustrating, that part was nailed on the head. I feel like his full like story arc just made more sense. And in my previous clip, I was also curious to see how they were gonna wrap the movie up, if it was gonna leave us like on a cliffhanger for a sequel. But that is something that they kind of changed in the storyline. And so the way that it ended, I think everybody would be satisfied if there wasn't a sequel. And so overall, even though they made some changes from the book to the movie, I feel like the spirit of the book was still kept intact. I feel like the suspense, I feel like the pacing of the movie, I feel like the fact that it was a sci-fi, sometimes like a small thriller element, but was also still able to be really funny, was masterfully done. I don't think I've ever seen a movie crafted in exactly that way. And even when I was walking out of the theater, there's a couple behind me saying, that was a really unique movie. But with that, I'll say bring back original movies. And now let's talk about the actors and the characters. So after I got used to Robert Pattinson's voice and his take on Mickey, I really did enjoy his performance. It did take me a little while to reconcile his take on Mickey versus how I took the character in the book. So I feel like Robert Pattinson's take on Mickey, he seemed very aloof. He also seemed very like not all the way there. And my take on Mickey reading the book was that he was lackadaisical, you could say, but he wasn't stupid by any means. And so it took a little bit for me to kind of figure out what Robert Pattinson was doing there, because to me, my version of Mickey made more sense to both the book's storyline and the movie storyline. Until I met Mickey 18, Robert Pattinson did a really good job of distinguishing the two Mickeys, which I think can be hard, especially because you are technically portraying the same person. They're just like a different iteration of that person. So there's a slight tweak in their personalities, but like the underlying person is still the same, you know? And so I thought his performance ended up being really, really good. I mean, Robert Pattinson is one of those actors where I feel like sometimes he just takes on roles just to try it out, to stretch himself to the max, to see what he can do. And I feel like he definitely did that here. Then we have Mark Ruffalo playing as the commander. I can't remember what exactly his name was. And I don't think I realized that Mark Ruffalo was gonna be the one playing this role. Like, that's just not what I had in my head. But I think his performance was interesting, I'll say that. And in the movie, they portray the commander as essentially a failed politician. Like, he's gone through a couple of rounds of elections and has lost them, and so he decides, so that he has some type of power, so that he can fulfill his God complex, he decides to be like the commander of this mission leaving Earth. And based on the mannerisms, based on the cadence of speech, based on the inflection in the speech, Mark Ruffalo very clearly took inspiration for Trump. Like, there is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Even some of the ways that he just like moved his mouth, you were like, he definitely studied Trump for this. But that's also where some of the satire that I mentioned came in, because some of those moments were really only funny because you knew who he was kind of being compared to in that moment. But I've never seen Mark Ruffalo in a role like that, and so I'm glad that I got to see him kind of expand and see what else he can do. I'm used to him in just like a rom-com role or like as the Hulk. So it was interesting to like see him in that role. I think he did an interesting job, but I think I do prefer him in more of like the Hulk and like the everyday man type of roles. But he did what he needed to do in this role in Mickey 17, so I'll give him that. And lastly, let's talk about Nasha and Naomi Ackie's portrayal of Nasha in the story. And I know I had mentioned in the other clip that there was kind of some hype online around her portrayal. And while I love Naomi Ackie in this movie and playing Nasha, I think the bigger thing is just seeing a Black character portrayed this way. Like, Nasha in this movie, she gets to be kind of weird, very weird in certain moments. She gets to be the love interest, but a love interest that you could tell had so much like raw love for Mickey. But also she was like this badass soldier woman doing flips, beating people's ass. She stood 10 toes down for Mickey and mankind, and I love that. I just really appreciated her character. I'm glad that the story arc changed to be able to kind of fit that a little better, and now I can definitely understand why people were so hype about her character and the portrayal of Nasha. Overall, this whole experience was just really refreshing. I'm glad that I got to read the book and watch the movie so close together, and I definitely will be doing this again. But overall, if I had to rate the movie like I'd rate a book, I would give it a 4.5. While it wasn't absolutely perfect, it definitely left an impact. It was definitely something that I enjoyed. And I definitely recommend the book or the movie if it sounds like something that would interest you. I really don't think you could go wrong with either or both. And if you made it to the end of this video, leave a person emoji, but leave a few of them to represent the multiples that we saw in Mickey 7 and Mickey 17. And as always, you were my absolute favorite, my little tater tot, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.